The broadcast of the regular meeting of the Audit Committee will now begin.
Good morning. Welcome to our regularly scheduled Audit Committee meeting. Today is June 15th, 2020, and we are here to convene with our Independent Audit Committee members. Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Councilmember Fletcher? Here. Schrader?
Here.
Fisher? Musich?
Present.
Johnston?
Present.
Chair Palmisano?
Present.
There are 5 members present.
Thank you. We do have a quorum of this committee and we can begin. As we begin, I will note for the record that this meeting has remote participation by members of the City Council, and City staff has authorized under Minnesota statutes section 13D.021 due to the declared local public health emergency. The first thing that we do in audit committee meetings is to adopt the agenda. I will move that for adoption and ask for a second.
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Musich. I don't say all those in favor. I believe I call on the clerk to please call the roll for adoption of the agenda.
Correct. Thanks. Councilmember Fletcher?
Aye.
Schrader?
Aye.
Fisher? Musich?
Aye.
Johnston?
Aye.
Chair Palmisano?
Aye.
There are 5 ayes.
Thank you. That motion carries and this agenda is adopted. Next, we will approve the minutes of April 27th, 2020 from our last meeting. Those are in your packets, the electronic packets for this meeting, and also available online. Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Councilmember Fletcher?
Aye.
Schrader?
Aye.
Fisher? Musich?
Aye.
Johnston?
Aye.
Chair Palmisano?
Aye.
There are 5 ayes.
Thank you. Those minutes from the last meeting are adopted. Colleagues, under first item of business to take care of is to extend the appointment of our interim director, Ryan Patrick, to this position of interim director of internal audit, effective July 29th, when the current term is set to expire, for a period not to exceed 90 days. I will move that and ask for a second of this motion.
Schrader, second.
Thank you. Any comments or questions about this motion? Seeing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Committee member, excuse me, Fletcher?
Aye.
Schrader?
Aye.
Fisher? Musich?
Aye.
Johnston?
Aye.
Chair Palmisano?
Aye.
There are 5 ayes.
Thank you. That appointment is approved. Next, we have the report of our internal auditor. We'll be looking for updates about internal audit department's work, and I believe that presenting this in its entirety will be Director Patrick. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. We can jump right in.
Mm-hmm.
Move to the next slide. Do we have the next slide up? Thanks. So I'd like to begin this conversation talking about the murder of George Floyd, as nearly every conversation at the city should right now. And I want to talk about audit's role in the current situation. So audit work examines the existing structures we have in place, the risks they pose, the dangers of inaction, and requires the courage to speak the truth regardless of organizational pressures. Internal audit provides broad oversight for the city, and we're here to help. I want to recognize the fact that this is another civilian oversight agency that works for the city. We have a committee that includes members of the community and members of the council and an independent organization within the city that's here to do research, address risks, and look hard structures in the face, regardless of all these organizational pressures. I'd like to note that the International Professional Practices Framework provided guidance recently in response to current events on the role in assessing and reporting on organizational culture and the management of conduct risk. This is different than normal risk in that it addresses the failures to address misconduct within an organization. And I think it's particularly relevant at this time. We're not proposing necessarily right now additional audit work related to the police, but I want to remind the committee members that you have power through this body to address these important issues. And last, I'd like to read some sections from an email that was sent out by Richard Chamber, who's the president of the Institute of Internal Auditors, our governing body as the profession of auditors. And they don't typically take strong stances on social issues, and that's why this email was particularly relevant. He started saying that we as a profession often talk about the courage in the context of creating value for our organization. We recognize the horrific and unjustified death of George Floyd and too many others before him, and that we must confront these issues. Nothing less than reform in our policing, in our laws, and the way we interact with one another on the most basic level must be our singular goal as auditors. We are courageous when we converse openly and honestly, allowing ourselves a better understanding of our shortcomings, of our weaknesses as individuals. This is how collectively we will be better and do better.
Thank you, Director Patrick. Given the high profile and also the important work around MPD and also public safety in our city right now, I'm really eager for you to share publicly some of the things we've been talking about the audit team's change to approach in evaluating and working with this department. So thank you.
I'm happy to reflect on any of the past MPD research that we've done and have any discussion about what future work we might do before we move on to the next slide. By all means, anyone feel free to jump in with Chair Palmisano's consent, and otherwise I will move on to the COVID-19 audit approach.
I am not seeing anybody in queue, but just to remind my colleagues, great. Remind my colleagues, a way to ask to speak would just be through the meeting chat lens. I know that committee member Fisher does actually have some prepared questions for this and is having difficulty getting in, but I will just start by calling on Councilmember Schrader.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano, and thank you, Director Patrick. I think that is, appreciate you bringing that up. I think it was very well said. I think that we are still in the process of figuring out what that will look like. I know myself and other council members feel there's going to be a very critical role for the audit committee moving forward, but I think we're ready to, not ready to put some of those forward, but I think that we'll kind of be in communication about that.
Thank you. Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. I think that the need for us to get reliable information and to look honestly at some very difficult information is going to be exceptionally urgent. So I appreciate you framing the conversation this way. I've received a lot of contact from members of the community who are really looking for much clearer answers about what happened especially in the immediate days following George Floyd's death. What decisions were made? Where did chain of command work as intended? Where did it not? I think there's an awful lot of need to create transparency for people about where our systems operated as intended and where they failed, where our systems need to be redesigned, and where we need to take seriously that they were perhaps designed for a different intent and didn't work. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity right now to really think about Audit's role in this. And I agree with Councilmember Schrader that we're probably not in a place today to ask you specific questions, but I know that the community right now is looking for answers and looking for solutions, and often proposing solutions that aren't actually allowed, or that aren't actually things that will work with existing structures and limitations. And so as much transparency as we can provide for everybody about the structures that we're working within, about the things that are already being tried, about the things that are being tried and not working, so that people can propose solutions that will hopefully achieve their intent. I think the audit committee can play an incredible role in that process. So appreciate you framing this in terms of some very hard work ahead. I do think that this committee can play an important role.
Thank you. I'm wondering if the clerk knows, have we yet been joined by committee member Fisher?
Not as yet.
Okay. Commissioner Musich.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. I'm wondering if we also want to consider looking at the emergency response and the communications that were going out to the public as part of that response through this committee. There seemed to be a total failure of communication at some points, and that also led to, I think, probably not the best response from all the members of the public. So if we could not just think about the police and how that institution component of the institution function, but also the emergency response component as well. That's all I got. Thank you.
Thank you. I think this is really good. I think this is really good feedback, and there are certainly more opportunities for feedback to reach out directly to Director Patrick and his team, and we'll go ahead. I did want to mention something that Mr. Fisher brought up in an email last night, was about, I think, one of the more recent audits that we've done with MPD was on off-duty work. And I do think that that is relevant, and I did want to share that while the early efforts of the off-duty work group, which is a group that was formed after this audit and as a result of this audit on off-duty work, there was an audit. Director Patrick can speak to the work of the audit, but ultimately identified processes in our city that need to be changed, that need to be looked at and changed. One of those early processes in our off-duty work audit actually had already identified how often we require off-duty work from businesses with issues around safety. And I think we all know, and we talked about it during the off-duty audit, that that isn't a proactive approach to public safety in our city. We had already discussed that instead we should be working with these businesses to create holistic safety plans such that a police presence is not needed. These are the kinds of systemic issues that we can address when we work collaboratively. So as a result of the off-duty audit, we brought together department leaders, council members, the chief, and even the Federation to the table, because we all agree that this is a process that needs improvement. Other departments that have been engaged are Reg Services, Business Licensing, the City Attorney's Office, and Public Works. They've been recruited to help as their time comes. This was right before the COVID emergency had us all work remotely, and also changed the way a lot of businesses operate. So we've identified a lack of data around how off-duty work is currently being assigned, who is hiring these officers, and how many hours a single officer is taking on. The work group had identified some of the lapses in data collection, and we were working on creating a list of new data points to collect moving forward. But as you might imagine, when the COVID crisis hit, everything stopped, as did much of the off-duty work in our city. So we had been retooling as to how we continue to have this conversation on off-duty, even though the COVID pandemic had made it very murky and unclear as to when any of these businesses or when a lot of the places that need off-duty might ever have off-duty again. So I would say we're currently there. We're currently working on data and working to have surveys go out about it, but mostly due to COVID and the change in how people go and move around our city, the future of this at this moment is a little unclear. I wanted to offer that as kind of the follow-on of one of our bodies of work done with audit. Councilmember Schrader.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. And I just wanted to follow up on one point of feedback. I think one of the things I'm hearing a lot from constituents is just they have specific recommendations of reforms that are possible. And to talk a little bit about, back to Councilmember Fletcher's point, you know, we're at this position where it's not enough to just be for reforms. We need to be for the means for those reforms. And there's a lot of confusion in the public about how reforms would happen, whether that is disbanding the police department or whether there needs to be state action. So I think as we move forward, it'd be very helpful to just be very clear on not just the timeline and what's been going on and what data is needed, but also just kind of the means for that change.
That's a good point, Councilmember. My understanding of the means, I mean, we don't have solutions yet for the off-duty work group, but part of having the Federation at the table is that we would need the Federation's agreement to move forward with changes to off-duty work. So as I said, as of March, mid-March, we haven't met yet, and we are looking for what those next steps are, but that is a good reminder as to where the barriers are to making meaningful change. Seeing no other comments or questions, I'm going to ask Director Patrick to lead into our existing auditor update.
Sure, and just one last note. I had mentioned that we meet every other month, and this is a rapidly developing situation. And I don't want audit to lose its momentum in relation to these issues, so I'll be reaching out to members specifically as we continue to develop ideas and work related to policing and public safety in the city, since we will have a 2-month break in between these two meetings. Kind of related to that is just due to the timing between these two meetings, it was a very short timeline in between meetings. So I'm going to talk about the developments that we've had since the last audit committee meeting. I'm not going to go through everything I went through at the last meeting, specifically related to continuous monitoring and open audit issues, because a lot of that information would be exactly the same. I want to focus on the specific things that we're working on and give you a little bit more time to digest those rather than spending a long time rehashing everything that we talked about last time. So first, I would like to talk about the COVID-19 audit approach and where we are in that process, because this is really critical work. So if you recall from the last meeting, we broke it into 3 phases, and we're currently in the first phase. That's where we're looking at kind of the criteria, key performance indicator, and best practices research. We're developing our knowledge set and our knowledge pool so that when we work with various departments around the city and when we're doing our audit work related to COVID-19, that we use the best industry practices to analyze these issues, as it's a really unique situation and not one that necessarily audit shops around the country were expecting or prepared for. So we've been working with a local government auditor work group, including audit directors from around the country. We've received a lot of feedback related to this work. And at the same time, we're using that feedback along with our own understanding of the workings of the city to develop a Minneapolis specific survey that's going to go out to various departments around the country. We're nearing the end of that process and just want to make sure we're not duplicating efforts that are occurring via other cities, but we want City of Minneapolis specific information, not about our city, but about issues that we think are of great import to the city. We're also working on a department survey that's going to go out. It will be a modified and focused enterprise risk assessment we need to reevaluate the risk assessment that we did prior to COVID, and we want to use this knowledge base to inform how we do risk assessment related to COVID. And I just wanted to give a special thanks to Corey Stokes, the Austin City Auditor. I've been working with her, and she's collecting and organizing lots of research from around the country. They're doing an amazing job, and it's been a great partnership working with them. And a special thanks to my team for attending dozens and dozens of webinars and presentations and reviewing all that material. I know webinars can get trying at times, but there's so many right now that contain quality information that we are finding more information than we could possibly process in between meetings to add to the audit plan. So that's in progress. We hope to, by the next audit committee meeting, have more specific information related to that for the audit committee, including a report. Next is data governance. That's one of the next big consults that we have on the audit plan coming forth in Q3, possibly Q4, and we're in initial conversations with the clerk's office, kind of defining the scope of the consultation and the audit tools we'll use to do so. That includes IT, and it affects all sorts of departments because we're talking about proper data governance in that context, and nearly every department maintains data. But in particular, the clerk's office and the IT department really play a very critical role in that. And I know IT has been very busy during the current times. So we're working with them to kind of discuss the initial possibilities of what this consultation might look like. The clerk's office is using a tool that's pretty outstanding. We're just learning the ins and outs of it that help you build a coherent and concrete citywide governance policy. And our best option as we approach this project might be looking at readiness, just audit readiness, using that tool to evaluate the potential for implementation of this framework. Because it's new and because we're going to be addressing many departments around the city, we might want to look first at whether departments and specifically how ready they are to implement a framework for data governance. So more to come on that. Move to the next slide. I wanted to talk as well about some collaborative efforts that we have going on. So there are so many high intensity and high importance activities going on around the city that audit needs to be a partner and share its unique skill set with other departments as they try and navigate through this intense period of time. And in that spirit, we're developing a work sharing agreement with finance to assist in the grant management and oversight process. We have a memo of understanding with them that provides the required buffer for audit integrity. We don't want to compromise our abilities as auditors to work in that field later doing audit work. So we narrowly define the scope of how we can assist specifically in that memo so that we don't wander into the realm of not being auditors on those projects. But we will be able to provide some significant lift for them as they work through the myriad of grants and grant applications and required oversight during COVID and the protests. And this is also beneficial for us in that we will have a much better understanding of their process, and it's just going to allow for a more effective and efficient audit in the future, as we know audit work is likely related to all of these grants and money that is flowing into the city for the current crisis. Move to the next slide. So just a quick refresher on prior audits in progress. So we have the construction contracts audit phase 2. I thought that might be done by this audit committee meeting, but work is still going on. They're in the very final stages of this audit. It's relevant right now because it's talking about contract change amendments, and given everything that's going on, it's likely that this is occurring throughout the city right now. So we should have more information. We should have a full report back to the audit committee at the next meeting related to that. And the second is the park board grant management audit. Again, grants are very critical during this time. So we are working with the park board to assess compliance and fraud risks and how they're mitigating those specifically. So this remains very relevant in the current time. Both contracts and grants are heavily affected by COVID-19, and this audit work continues. Move to the next slide. We're still working with departments on modified timelines to address open audit issues. Obviously, things changed rapidly, and a lot of the audit issues that were open were challenging to address during COVID-19. And now, given the current situation with the police department and public safety in the city, since a lot of our audit issues related to those functions, we need to reimagine possibly how those open audit issues look and how we resolve them. But we are having meetings again to address these audit issues. As departments have adapted to the current situation, it's possible for us to work with them, looking at those open audit issues and hopefully closing those out before the next meeting, many of them. And the records management audit issues that are currently on the open audit issue list will be addressed in the consultation. Some of those recommendations were older, and they need to be relooked at because some of the remedies that we recommended back when this records management audit happened just aren't as relevant now. And if we're implementing a new framework and looking at a new process moving forward, they may no longer be relevant.
Mr. Patrick, there's a question and comment related to our data governance work
Sure.
by Councilmember Fletcher. Councilmember Fletcher?
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. I guess I just wanted to make sure that as a part of that data governance work, we're looking at the places throughout the enterprise where the way we're managing data and the way we would prefer to manage data to sort of live up to our city's principles around both transparency and privacy come into conflict with the State Data Practices Act. Because I know that there are, throughout several projects I've worked on in the last couple of years as a policymaker, I've run into limitations where either data that I think we would all agree should be something we can keep private is classified as either public or non-public, which is different from private in the Data Practices Act, or that there's data that we would agree should be transparent that we are required to classify as private. And so I think that in both cases, it would be helpful as we're doing this kind of system-wide audit around data governance to flag the places where we see the potential for policy improvement at the state level so that we can ask for, through our IGR, for a more comprehensive re-examination of the Data Practices Act. Because I think what has not worked well for us over a period of years has been to ask for sort of scattershot improvements to the Data Practices Act. And every time it gets opened up, we maybe make an improvement, and then some other legislative process happens that it's kind of been a one step forward, two steps back process with our relationship to state law. And so I'm hoping that we can, as a part of this, identify areas where our current practices in order to comply with state law are not necessarily complying with the spirit and intention of the city's commitments to transparency and privacy.
And Chair Palmisano, Committee Member Fletcher, that's great feedback. I think that's particularly relevant given some of the initiatives around privacy and data that have been that you've worked on actually throughout the last year. And I think certainly that's good feedback. And as we're designing this project, we can make sure to incorporate that analysis into our work.
Thank you. I'm just going to pause. I know that Committee Member Fisher has joined, and I think he's by phone, so I need to maybe periodically ask if he has a comment or question that he might want to talk about. Mr. Fisher?
I'm just catching up, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I'm just catching up, so I'm afraid I'm going to have to
Sure.
take a little bit of time to form some questions.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Go ahead, Mr. Patrick.
If we could go back to the slide deck. I have one proposal to add to the audit plan, the 2020 audit plan. And it's something that we were working on prior to COVID-19, but I think it's extremely relevant right now, and that is a collaboration on a consult with the Division of Race and Equity. The Division of Race and Equity has rolled out a race and equity analysis toolkit that's incorporated into a variety of city decision-making processes that allows and encourages and requires departments and leadership to address race and equity issues in citywide decision-making. So this is kind of a two-part consult. One would be to look at how we can incorporate equity analysis into audit work. It's extremely critical as we're looking at all these audits that touch on every part of city governance, that we are keeping race and equity at the forefront of the conversation. So working with their team, they're the experts in this issue, working with their team to really make sure that we're incorporating that analysis into our own work, I believe is critical. And the second part is audit providing its skill set to the Division of Race and Equity and how they cultivate data and analyze their own process. It's a new toolkit that's being rolled out, and as they look at how to improve and how to better use the tool, audit can provide its skill set in analyzing those types of issues to allow them to better improve the tool over time. So we've been having these meetings. They started prior to COVID-19, and now we're restarting some of these conversations. And I believe in Q4 we would have the capacity to address this, and I do think it is very timely that we do so.
Thank you. I don't think you'd have disagreement from any of us here, but does anybody have questions or comments about this work effort? I'm not seeing any, and so I'm going to presume that this is just a mutually agreed upon amendment to this work plan. I think that that's all right, and the clerk can tell me differently if we need a formal action here to approve this change at this point in time to the work plan.
I would probably advise if you could do that.
To make the motion, I would be happy to do that. So
I would concur.
All right, so on the advice of our city attorney and our clerk's office, I'd like to propose a formal amendment, if we could go back one slide, to this year's work plan, and that's the work effort with the Division of Race and Equity. I will make that motion. I need a second for that motion, and then we can talk about it.
I'll second, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I'll call that as Committee Member Fisher seconding and see what questions or thoughts my colleagues might have. Not seeing any. I'll just call the question. Clerk, could you call the roll for the addition of this to our 2020 audit work plan?
Sure. Committee Member Fletcher?
Aye.
Schrader?
Aye.
Fisher?
Aye.
Musich?
Aye.
Johnston?
Aye.
Chair Palmisano?
Aye.
There are 6 ayes.
Thank you. That amendment to the work plan is adopted formally. Mr. Patrick, go ahead and continue.
That would be the only change to the audit plan. Otherwise, it remains unchanged from the last meeting, and we'll just continue to pursue everything that we have on there.
Thank you.
Again, this is our list of open audit issues. We have extended some of them. Some of them are coming up. We'll continue to work with the departments, as I mentioned, to close some audit issues. Note there are a number of them related to records management and police work. So those might change over time, but they are currently open audit issues. We're working to close the remaining finance audit issues, and we'll continue to update as that occurs. Move to the next slide. So again, this is a shorter auditor update. We had a shorter amount of time in between meetings, but it also was important to focus on the incredibly important work that is going on in the city right now. So I thank you for humoring me with the shorter audit presentation. I hope it was helpful, and I'm happy to answer any remaining questions that you might have.
Thank you, colleagues. Are there questions or comments about this report? Not seeing any, I will move to receive and file the update report of our internal audit department's work in progress. May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Commissioner Musich has seconded. Clerk, please call the roll.
Committee member Fletcher.
Aye.
Schrader.
Aye.
Fisher.
Aye.
Musich.
Aye.
Johnston.
Aye.
Chair Palmisano.
Aye.
There's 6 ayes.
Thank you. Next are announcements. The only announcement that I did want to make and share with my colleagues is to mention that Director Patrick has been heavily involved in our conversations these past few weeks as to how we move forward with changes from the aspect of civilian oversight, from the aspect of our unique relationship with the Department of Human Rights at the state. We've been on several calls directly with our civil rights team, Director Jafar, with the Department of Human Rights themselves in putting together in adding their input and thoughts on the TRO agreement. And so I was wondering, because August 24th is rather far out, and because it is important to do the work of audit, to let people know about it and to make that work public, and so that we know what our audit team is working on, I was wondering if my colleagues would entertain a check-in, or rather an adjournment to a meeting that is sooner. This specific committee was too soon to have specific thoughts or projects that would take place and have it outlined enough to bring to audit committee today. But I do expect that in the next couple of weeks we will have a clearer role as to what things audit should be involved in going forward for some of the quick progress that we would like to make in matters of public safety. So the agenda setting, the time that we had thought about for doing a check-in and seeing and helping to together prioritize some of this work going forward was June 29th at 10 a.m. I will check in with you all individually to see if that fits your schedules and to see if a quorum of members could indeed meet at that time, but I'm wondering what people's thoughts are around that, because I don't want to wait until August 24th to amend the work of our audit committee, though they are certainly going in the right direction from my own perspective. Members?
That date and time works for me, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. Thank you. I've heard from Councilmember Fletcher that works and he supports moving up the meeting as well. Are there others? I think that perhaps Councilmember Schrader jumped in, but we didn't hear your microphone. Your microphone cut out.
Sure. Can you repeat the date, please?
June 29th at 10 a.m.
Okay. Yes, that's not a problem.
Great. Commissioner Musich.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. I will not be able to attend that meeting at that time. I am supportive of it moving up, but if you need me for quorum, I will be unavailable on the 29th.
Sure. I believe that committee member Johnston, it also works for her, so I think we are good on quorum for that next meeting. And Commissioner Musich, we will make sure that you are involved in the conversations leading up to it.
Okay, lovely. Thank you.
To make sure that we have your input. So let us go ahead and choose that we're going to while the next formal committee meeting is not until August 24th, let us convene again on June 29th to bring forward some ideas that both Director Patrick has been having with his collaboration around the enterprise and our other partners, as I've mentioned, and also to connect individually with others on this audit committee. So I will make that as clerk. Could you help me out here? Do I believe that we don't need to pass that I will just adjourn our meeting here to June 29th at 10 a.m. Is that correct?
That is correct, unless you have further announcements.
Are there any other further announcements from committee members? I don't see any. Director Patrick and his team, I want to thank you for being a part of the very current and very real conversations happening around our city. First, it was our COVID, our global pandemic crisis, and how we could be good stewards of both a budget shortfalls, significant budget shortfalls, and doing well through that emergency. And second, it is very importantly in one of the most critical points in time for our public safety and how we move forward to transform public safety in our city and create a model that works better for everyone. So thank you for your work on that. Thank you to your audit team for those kinds of conversations. So with that, I will adjourn this.
Chair?
Yes, please.
Well, this is Dave Fisher. I'm going to apologize to the committee as a whole for being so inept in joining the meeting this morning. But if it is possible, if the city attorney and the clerk agree, I would like to record a vote in favor of extending the interim status of our current interim audit director. I know that vote occurred before I could join, but I'd like to add my vote to that.
I'll ask our city attorney if that's permissible, but I do think that at the very least your comment could be noted here under announcements. Ms. Trammell?
I think that the best way to handle this is to have the comment noted, but not to change the vote, because the meeting needs to be recorded as accurately as possible for the time that the vote was taken.
Yeah, I'll ask then to the clerk's office to record that in the announcement section, and committee member Fisher, your support is well noted.
I understand. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So with that, we will adjourn this meeting to June 29th at 10 a.m. for consideration of additional ads and focus points for our audit team for the rest of the year. Thank you, everybody, for your time today, and we will stand adjourned.
Thank you.
Thanks.